8:12 a.m. A routine public event inside the United States is quietly altered. No sirens, no announcement, no visible disruption. But inside military command channels, the change is immediate. A scheduled U.S. Air Force aerial operation, planned weeks in advance and cleared through multiple layers of command, is abruptly canceled. The official explanation is short, carefully worded, and unusually vague. Operational requirements. No location is mentioned, no duration is specified. No clarification follows. For most observers, the decision passes unnoticed. For defense analysts, it does not. High-visibility military appearances are rarely canceled. When they are, the reason is almost never logistical. In U.S. military doctrine, public-facing air operations are among the last commitments to be altered. They are symbolic, planned to the minute, and normally immune to short-notice changes, which is why this cancellation triggers immediate attention. Within intelligence circles, the language stands out. Operational requirements is not a placeholder, it is a signal. It indicates assets are being redirected, not delayed, not rescheduled, but reassigned. Reassigned to priority missions. As analysts begin tracing possible destinations, a parallel shift unfolds thousands of miles away. In North Korea, monitoring systems register an increase in military readiness across select regions. Communications traffic rises. Command structures tighten. Units that were previously static enter a heightened posture. There is no missile launch, no test announcement, no public display. But readiness is not measured by spectacle. It is measured by movement. The timing matters. The U.S. cancellation and the North Korean posture change occur within the same operational window. Close enough to be noticed, far enough apart to deny direct linkage. That ambiguity is intentional. For Pyongyang, elevated alert levels serve a familiar purpose. They signal resolve without provocation. They test reaction without escalation. For Washington, silence becomes policy. No press briefing follows. No confirmation is offered. Because in moments like this, clarity removes leverage. As the morning progresses, one fact becomes clear to those watching closely. This is not about a single canceled mission, and it is not about a single regional alert. It is about synchronization. When U.S. operational plans change quietly and North Korean forces respond indirectly, the situation moves beyond coincidence. It enters the realm of signaling. By 8:20 a.m., analysts agree on one point. Something has shifted. Not enough to trigger alarms, but enough to place the region on watch. And when both sides begin adjusting posture without speaking publicly, the next phase is never announced in advance. The cancellation itself is not the story. The timing is. In U.S. military operations, changes to high-visibility air missions are rare not because they are difficult to cancel, but because they are carefully insulated from last-minute interference. When such a mission is abruptly scrapped, it usually means the asset involved is needed elsewhere, immediately. This is where analysts begin narrowing possibilities. Strategic air assets are not reassigned casually. They are redirected only when planners anticipate near-term requirements that outweigh political symbolism, public visibility, and diplomatic signaling. In other words, the cost of cancellation is already factored in. That alone eliminates routine explanations. Exercises do not require secrecy. Training does not demand silence. Deterrence patrols are usually announced. What remains is contingency response. The language used by U.S. officials reinforces this reading. No follow-up clarification. No reassurance. No timeline. This is deliberate. By withholding details, Washington preserves flexibility while signaling seriousness to those capable of reading between the lines. At the same time, the move forces adversaries to interpret incomplete information. That uncertainty is the point. For North Korea, ambiguity is destabilizing. Pyongyang relies on early indicators to gauge U.S. intent. Public exercises, deployments, statements. When none of those appear, but assets quietly disappear from scheduled commitments, the picture becomes harder to read. That is why North Korea's response does not take the form of a launch. Instead, it shifts posture. Heightened alert levels allow Pyongyang to signal awareness without provoking immediate retaliation. They buy time. They preserve options. But they also confirm concern. In military signaling, increased readiness is rarely performed without reason. It reflects perceived risk. From Washington's perspective, this reaction validates the move. The objective is not to provoke action. It is to force recalculation. By changing plans without explanation, the United States introduces doubt into North Korea's decision-making process. What has been reassigned? Where is it going? And how quickly could it be employed? Those questions matter more than public statements. As this dynamic unfolds, one principle becomes clear. This is not a show of force. It is a manipulation of expectations. And in strategic competition, expectation often shapes behavior faster than hardware. By the end of this phase, both sides are no longer reacting to events. They are reacting to each other's uncertainty. That is when situations become most sensitive. Because once posture changes on both sides without public escalation, the margin for miscalculation narrows, and the next decision is rarely symbolic. At this stage, the situation enters its most dangerous phase, not because of action, but because of timing. Once posture shifts on both sides without public escalation, military planners begin operating inside what is known as the compressed decision window. This is the period where hesitation carries as much risk as action. For Washington, the challenge is precise. Respond too visibly, and the move could be interpreted as preparation for preemptive action. Respond too quietly, and the signal risks being ignored. Or worse, normalized. There is no neutral option. Inside U.S. command structures, the focus turns to sequencing. What must be done first? What must remain invisible? What must be seen, but not explained? This is where modern deterrence operates. Not through speeches, not through ultimatums, but through posture that forces interpretation. At the same time, North Korea faces its own narrowing set of options. Once alert levels rise, standing down too quickly signals uncertainty. Maintaining heightened readiness for too long invites countermeasures. Pyongyang understands this dynamic well. That is why there is no missile launch, no test fire, no theatrical display. Instead, the regime watches. Every radar shift, every satellite movement, every unexplained absence. The most dangerous aspect of this window is not what either side does, but what each side expects the other to do next. Expectations harden quickly. For U.S. planners, the priority becomes clear. Restore control of the timeline. This does not require escalation. It requires predictability on American terms. Quiet repositioning, subtle readiness adjustments, moves that signal capability without declaring intent. These actions are designed to close off pathways, not announce them. Meanwhile, North Korea's leadership must decide whether the initial signal has achieved its purpose. If the goal was attention, it has succeeded. If the goal was leverage, the outcome remains uncertain. The longer the window remains open, the greater the risk that an unintended signal is misread. History offers no comfort here. Most major military crises do not begin with attacks. They begin with unresolved ambiguity. By this point, both sides are aware of one truth. The moment for passive observation has passed. The next move, however subtle, will define the trajectory. And once that move is made, reversing course becomes significantly harder. This is the threshold where crises either stabilize or accelerate. And in the hours ahead, the margin between those outcomes will be measured in decisions made without public acknowledgement. The response does not begin with an announcement. It begins with alignment. Inside U.S. command structures, the priority is not speed, it is coherence. Any visible move must fit into a broader pattern, one that signals readiness without narrowing diplomatic or military options. This is where American doctrine diverges sharply from theatrical displays. The United States does not respond to uncertainty by shouting. It responds by repositioning. Air assets quietly adjust their operational cycles. Naval forces alter patrol geometry. Command and control nodes shift emphasis without changing posture publicly. Nothing here is accidental. Each adjustment is designed to be detectable. but not dramatic. Seen by those who are watching closely, ignored by those who are not. This distinction matters. The goal is not to intimidate North Korea into immediate reaction. It is to stabilize the environment by reasserting control over escalation pathways. In practical terms, this means closing off options. By subtly increasing readiness across multiple domains, Washington reduces the space in which Pyongyang can act unpredictably. The number of viable next steps shrinks. Launch becomes riskier. Delay becomes more costly. Signaling becomes harder. At the same time, the United States avoids creating a single focal point that could be misinterpreted as preparation for a strike. There is no mass deployment, no singular movement that dominates headlines. Instead, the response is distributed. Air, sea, command infrastructure. Each piece reinforces the others without declaring intent. For North Korea, this creates a dilemma. The American response does not validate alarmist narratives. It does not justify escalation, but it also does not allow the situation to drift. The message is implicit but unmistakable. The United States is prepared and comfortable, operating in ambiguity. This is the essence of mature deterrence: control without provocation, readiness without rigidity. As these adjustments take effect, the strategic balance begins to settle into a new configuration, not because tensions disappear, but because the rules become clearer. By the end of this phase, both sides understand the new baseline. The United States has responded, but on its own terms. And when a response does not force a reaction, it often achieves its purpose. The episode does not end with a launch. It does not end with a statement. And it does not end with a visible confrontation. That is precisely the point. In modern strategic competition, outcomes are rarely defined by what happens, but by what does not happen. North Korea activated assets. The United States adjusted posture. Neither side crossed a visible threshold. Yet the balance shifted. For Pyongyang, the message is unambiguous. Quiet American responses are not signs of hesitation. They are indicators of confidence. By responding without escalation, Washington removed the incentive for further signaling. The environment became less ambiguous, not because intentions were declared, but because boundaries were quietly reinforced. This matters. North Korea's strategy relies on forcing reactions, creating moments where the next step feels unavoidable. In this case, that pressure failed to materialize. The United States did not mirror the alert, did not amplify rhetoric, did not validate a crisis narrative. Instead, it absorbed the signal and reshaped the context. That approach sends a broader message beyond the Korean peninsula. To allies, it signals control. To adversaries, it signals restraint paired with readiness. To observers, it signals that escalation is not automatic, but neither is tolerance. This is deterrence without spectacle. No single action dominates headlines. No single move invites misinterpretation. Yet every relevant actor understands that options have narrowed. Crises that stabilize do so quietly. Crises that spiral do so when ambiguity is allowed to linger. Here, ambiguity was managed. By the end of the response window, North Korea remains on alert, but without momentum. The United States remains silent, but not inactive. That asymmetry is intentional. Because when one side is forced to watch without knowing what comes next, the advantage has already shifted. The absence of escalation is not the absence of consequence. It is the consequence. And in this case, the message was delivered without a single word.